You know, people say, oh, they don't kill women. Well, they kill women. At 8:30, my phone rings Saturday night, and it's an underworld contact saying, there have been 2 women shot at Panania. And I went, oh, okay, bit odd. So I then rang somebody, police and ambulance, and they said, yeah, we're at a shooting, and there's 2 crime scenes, we're not sure what's happening. I said, oh, is it domestic? And they said, we don't know. Then about half an hour later, I get a phone call again from the underworld, and he says, there's a burnt out car. You hear about a burnt out car, you go straight away, organised crime hit. And you got 2 women, which didn't seem to make sense. Then the next day, I'd found out who it was.
48-year-old Lametta Fadlala, mother of 2, was the likely target. The other victim, 38-year-old Amna Al-Hazuri, known to friends as Amy.
Lametta Fadlala first came on the scene in the early 2000s when she married Shady Durbis, who was the king of Tilapia Street, which was a street in Punchbowl known for its drug running and violence, and most significantly for the murder of a 14-year-old boy, Edward Lee. Durbis wasn't the one that killed Edward Lee, but police allege he was essentially the leader of the gang that was involved in that killing. And so police cracked down hard on him, and whether they realised it or not at the time, behind the scenes, his wife Lametta was very influential in pulling the strings. If you needed a gun, she could get it for you. If you needed a car, she could make that happen. She was even known to carry a gun at times, so that just shows you how into the lifestyle she was. Shady Durbis' best mate was a man called Halal Safi, who was himself heavily involved in the underworld. He'd started out as a bouncer in King's Cross, and then he'd become involved in drugs, both running and importation, and for that he was sent to prison. While in jail, he was attacked by rival inmates and stabbed 42 times, but managed to survive. And doctors said that was largely thanks to his huge frame. Halal Safi weighed over 200 kilograms. Lametta Fadlala ended up leaving her first husband, Shady Durbis, and going into a relationship with Halal Safi. That really was the talk of the underworld for a long time. Do you remember when you first came across Lametta Fadlala?
It would have been around 2006 when I first went to Middle Eastern organised crime. We just proactively targeted areas in southwestern Sydney, and Tilapia Street was one of those areas that we targeted, and we bounced across Lametta there.
What was she like?
I mean, a lot of women and a lot of wives and partners in that world are aware of what their partners or husbands or whatever are doing, and they reap the benefit of it. The difference with Lametta was that she actively participated. She liked to run with the foxes and hunt with the hounds, I think is the best way to put it. She was very good with the money side of things and the money management side of things, and the disguising of illicit proceeds through various businesses that she owned. She was smart enough to realise that if the more grief that she gave, the more she got in return.
Just after 8:30 Saturday night in August 2022, Lametta Fadlala was inside with her hairdresser, Amy Hazuri. Lametta had an engagement party that night at her boyfriend's restaurant. Amy was here doing her hair.
Getting ready to go out?
Yeah, it was going to be a good night. And through the salon, Amy had met a 16-year-old girl who was big on TikTok, a bit of an influencer. And she and her boyfriend had come to pick Lametta and her up that night to go to the function with them. And so they've pulled in, the 20-year-old boyfriend's driving, the 16-year-old girl's in the passenger seat. What they didn't realise at that time was that there's 2 gunmen sitting in a car over there. One of them comes around to the passenger seat where that 16-year-old girl is sitting, and because it's so dark, you haven't got a street light for 50 metres in either direction, couldn't see who his target was. And so he taps on the window 4 times. The girl, she similarly can't see who's tapping at her window, so she puts her window down, and he sees the girl sitting in the passenger seat, sees a man sitting in the driver's seat, so he knows they're not his targets. And so what he does is just unload 15 bullets into the back seat, cutting down Lametta Fadlala and Amy Hazuri. Lametta and Amy never really stood a chance. They're being shot at almost point blank range 15 times.
Now, everybody had talked about how she was married to 2 underworld figures years ago. But I've since found out that she also was quite close to Brownie Ahmed, another victim in this war. Perhaps she had been helping him with him trying to get money. Now, you got to remember, Lametta was very resourceful. The other theory that came out very quickly in the underworld is she had given a statement to police in relation to an attempted murder, a very, very heavy attempted murder between two crime gangs. The fact that you're talking to the police in that world can be fatal. Now, did they just think she'd spoken and didn't know what she'd said? And even if she said, I didn't tell them anything, and they didn't believe it, they just thought, we'll take her out anyway. If you talk to senior police about this is one that's got them stumped.
Did it surprise you when she was killed?
No, it didn't. We're talking about organised crime here. There's no rule book. Just because she was a woman, it doesn't mean that she was impervious to being murdered if she stepped out of line. It shocked me because she was well connected. About 4 or 5 man team that are involved. Like it's a big money hit, and burn that sort of cash on Lametta Fadlala. That in itself dictates how important or what sort of role that she played within the organised crime community.
We're less than a minute drive from Lametta's house where the shooting took place. Obviously pulled over in a panic. She's dragged from the car. People have tried to revive her. The neighbours helping here, but she's dead. And you can see her lying on the footpath, and there's nothing that could be done for her. She's probably been hit by 10 bullets. The 16-year-old girl's trying to call for help.
Yeah, she told police she was that traumatised by what she'd just seen that she was fumbling with her phone, barely able to make the call. When eventually she does, police, paramedics arrive. Lametta, there's nothing that can be done for her. They try and save Amy. They take her to hospital, but again, she's been shot probably 4 or 5 times. The tragic reality is that Amy Hazuri was another innocent victim in this gang war. She had no links to organised crime. I mean, whether she even knew about Lametta's links to the underworld remains to be seen.
Her father, who says he came to Australia to live in peace, now living with overwhelming loss.
After my daughter, no anything.
After somehow surviving the gym shooting, Tarek Zahed spends several months in hospital undergoing rehab and getting treatment on the eye that he lost. Once he gets out of hospital in Sydney, Tarek decides to move back down to Victoria. But obviously Tarek still has many friends and family in Sydney, and so one weekend he has to return for a wedding.
He came up here for a wedding. He had spent the afternoon at a very popular cafe in Bondi.
So Tarek's come from Bondi and he pulls up at this set of lights here, and within seconds as they're stopped, police surround the car. Now that's nothing unusual for Tarek Zahed. He's been pulled over many times. But what's different about this interaction is that they break through the back windows of his vehicle with beanbag bullets that leave him disorientated. There's glass everywhere. They then ram the door open and drag him. This lane's empty. They drag him across here onto the footpath. Over here, he's bleeding from the head, and they bandage him up. And it's right there that they tell him that he's under arrest for the murder of Yusuf Assoum 8 years earlier.
Tactical Operations Unit officers arrested the 42-year-old man in a car with another associate. There was a high-risk arrest because the man was non-compliant. He was then taken to Surrey Hills Police Station and charged with murder and also kidnapping offence.
Now, he was arrested for a decade-old murder. Now, a lot of people in the underworld said, they're just grabbing him to put him off the street.
The 3 men who've really been in charge of the Comanchero in Australia for the best part of a decade now, all behind bars awaiting trial on separate matters. And so police turn their attention to the man they believe is controlling things on the outside, and that's Alan Meehan. Alan Meehan grew up on the streets of Western Sydney. He was known to police from the time he was a young boy. He started out with the Rebels Bike Club, who were a rival to the Comanchero. But despite this, he actually struck up a friendship with a Comanchero bikie, Mark Buttle, of all people, and later down the track, once he'd done time in jail for possessing a gun and once he'd risen through the ranks of the Rebels to become president, the Comanchero tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Hey, what do you think about coming over to our side?" And so he did. And from there, things got even better for him. He rose through the ranks of the Comanchero then to again become president. He could afford lavish things like gold chains and fast cars and live a nice lifestyle, and he liked to show that off on social media. Meehan's most famous social media post, and the one that brings him the most attention comes late on a Sunday night. And it features him standing at a dinner table next to Tariq Zahed. Now, this is the first time anybody has publicly seen Tariq Zahed since he was shot. So it's a real collection of a who's who of the Comanchero. You've got big players, chiefly Mohammed Almo Alameddine, who is not somebody who's officially a member of the Comanchero, but this really goes to show just how intertwined he is with the heavy hitters of the bikie gang. And so off the back of this, police decide to crack down on me, and they say, all right, well, if you want to take to Instagram and show off your lifestyle, well, we're going to make things hard for you. And they take out a serious crime prevention order against him. And what he does is what Tariq Zahed had done before him. He decides, well, if life's going to be so tough for me in New South Wales, if police are going to dictate who I can talk to, where I can live, what car I can drive, what phone I can use, then I'm going to get out of here. And he shifts up to Queensland. But that does very little to help him in the end, because New South Wales police asked their Queensland colleagues to arrest him and extradite him back to Sydney. And they charge him with breaching his SCPO, and he's thrown behind bars awaiting trial.
His arrest doesn't slow down the Comanchero really, because to many he was a figurehead, and that there were still people, significant Comanchero members, who are pulling the strings.
The state's most wanted man has been arrested in Turkey 14 months after being accused of fleeing overseas on a fishing boat.
So Masood Zakaria is probably the most wanted man by New South Wales police, because he is the guy that they believe is instrumental in a lot of these murders.
Masood escaped Australia on a fishing boat at the height of COVID lockdown, when it was harder to get out of the country than it ever had been before. And so after more than a year overseas, he was feeling pretty untouchable. And soon enough, Masood was joined overseas by a significant contingent of Sydney's underworld, including one of his best mates and one of the men that police allege has been one of the most influential players in this gang war, and that is Rafat Alameddine. Rafat's family is originally from Lebanon, and so in late 2022 he got out of Australia and flew unimpeded by police. There was nothing they could do. He'd been found not guilty of assaulting an Uber driver at a trial just a few months earlier, and there was nothing left keeping him here. And so he went over to Lebanon, and there is where police believe he'll stay for a significant amount of time if he ever does come back to Australia.
Masood Zakaria, he's currently in detention in Turkey. They've gone and picked him up. He's moved his family to Lebanon, and I think he's going to try and go to Lebanon. But his big problem is he's Afghani born. And so he doesn't have the protection that a lot of those guys in Turkey do, or in Lebanon.
Police! Search warrant! Open the door!
There was a point in this gang war where police were on the back foot. The bodies were piling up on the streets. It was at an average of one fatal shooting every 6 weeks. And so just when they'd think, oh, hopefully that's it, we can get stuck into our investigations, another investigation would have to open because another man had been killed. But by the middle of 2022, police begin to get on the front foot. They arrest a significant number of alleged Alameddine members who were involved in the drug business through Strikeforce Sugarcane. And then after the deaths of Brownie Ahmed, Omar Zahed and Rami Iskander, they form Task Force Erebus, and very quickly Erebus begins to show results. They've gone from feeling utterly swamped with a murder on average every 6 weeks to having 6 months of clean air with this almost unofficial ceasefire in the underworld.
Police search warrant!
But that has to come to an end at some point, and in early March it does.
Running up to a parked SUV, this gunman strikes in a brutal and cold-blooded execution.
Taha had pulled into the car park at the Elite Fight Force gym in Sefton. The next thing he knew, a gunman was standing in front of his bonnet with a gun aimed at his head and began firing. The gunman then moved around to the driver's side window and fired the last of the fatal shots that would kill him there. As soon as we found out who the victim was, I began calling underworld contacts and asking, and none of them had ever heard of Taha. They said they knew that place was a Comanchero gym, but they'd never heard of this bloke.
We obviously believe this is just an egregious, violent act.
The shooting of Taha Sabaj, which some people thought was a mistaken identity, a lot of police aren't convinced of that, and some of the people involved saying he was associated with some very, very heavy hitters. Now, did he make a mistake in his dealings with them? That could have got him killed. The more popular theory is that he was shot as a message to people who were involved in that gym and that they were avenging the shooting of Nagliazzo, a lone wolf member killed last year. Now that means we're going to have the Comanchero and the lone wolf in conflict, and that is a frightening prospect for Sydney and for the police. So this is supposedly where 400 kilograms of cocaine belonging to the Comanchero landed and never eventuated in the streets of Sydney. And that is what has sparked this whole war.
That's allegedly why Medjid Hamzy was killed, because there was a suggestion that he'd stolen it. But still years on, police investigating that cocaine have never found a trace of it. So there's several theories now. Did it ever exist in the first place, or did the Comanchero make it up to carry out their business?
Now there's a wild theory amongst some very senior New South Wales police and some of the underworld that it died on the docks with federal authorities. It never came off. Yep. No one was told that it had been seized, and that created all this tension and a murder that kicked off a chain reaction of killings that is still going on to this day.